What's up, Wizards? It's the D and the Z, getting some big boy chin scratches down there. We're from the S through the G. We like it in Magic, and we got some more Kaldheim spoilers for you today, y'all. A little less hype than yesterday, I'll admit, but still, don't let that fool you. There's tons of amazing garbage to look at today. So let's begin by working our way through the commons and uncommons together as a team, building suspense the whole time. That's how this is done, kid. Let's start with Tormentor's Helm, Seize the Spoils, and Coma's Faithful. All three interesting commons that may not really go past the limited environment. But nonetheless, I want to check these out. Tormentor's Helm, especially interesting. This is just 1 red mana for an equipment. Equipped creature gets +1/+1, and whenever equipped creature becomes blocked, it deals 1 damage to defending player. It only costs 1 to equip this. Now, in like the red-white Warriors deck that wants a bunch of equipments, this might actually be somewhat playable, because it's just 1 to get on the field, 1 to equip. The Nahiri decks might like it too. I'm not saying this makes Nahiri playable, but this does make those decks way more aggressive, makes the creatures a little bit bigger at a relatively low cost, and if they do get blocked, you're still dealing damage, which is kind of cool in Historic with like Spectacle and whatnot. So card's kind of got a lot going for it, whether you're just trying to play a bunch of equipments in your deck or you actually want to get aggressive. It's certainly no Embercleave, but for just 1 mana and 1 equip cost, this could actually be way worse. I've got my eye on this, but I'm not sure that it actually does much of anything in Standard. Aside from that, we got Seize the Spoils. This is 3 mana, 2 and a red for a sorcery. As an additional cost to cast it, you discard a card. You draw 2 cards and create a treasure token. So it's Tormenting Voice, but it costs 1 extra mana, but it pays you back that mana by giving you a treasure token, meaning that it kind of ramps you. On your next turn, you can have 5 mana to do a thing. So it's not a bad card by any stretch, but is it better than, say, Thrill of Possibility or Cathartic Reunion, both of which we have access to? I'm not too sure that it is, but in decks that are heavily focused on getting treasure tokens or artifacts out, this could definitely deserve a slot. Aside from that, Coma's Faithful, the other card on this page here, is 3 mana, 2 and a red, or 2 and a black, I mean to say. I don't know how I misread that. For a 3/1 Elf Cleric with lifelink. And when it dies, each player mills 3 cards. So that's kind of interesting. You're incentivized to block with it because it's a 3/1 lifelink. It'll gain you a little bit of life back, keep you in the game, and probably trade with something that it blocks with, which is all really good. And when it does die, you get to mill for your Croxa deck or whatever you're trying to do, escape creatures or something like that. Reanimation, this works for all of that. And it's kind of a nice little package for just 3 mana, but at the same time, I doubt that this will see too much Standard play either. It's just an interesting, all-around package that might actually end up seeing some Pauper play, depending on how much self-mill is still a thing in Pauper. I'm not sure that it actually is, but, we've seen these 3 mana things that mill ourselves a couple of times. One of them was my exclusive preview a few sets ago, Gorging Vulture, and I think that this is probably on par with that. Vulture didn't see a whole heck of a lot of play either, so I'm not sure that this really makes the big leagues or anything, but I do kind of like the card. Other commons that we saw today included Raven Form, Sculptor of Winter, and Village Rites getting a reprint already, even though it's already in Standard with, I think, better art on the original, but this is really cool art. Don't get me wrong, but hey, I'll take more Village Rites. I'm fine with that. Sculptor of Winter is 2 mana, 1 and a green for a 2/2 elf rogue that is snow. And you can tap it to untap target snow land. We've seen cards really similar to this in the past in snow sets, and it's not too bad, especially if you got snow lands that can tap to do cool stuff. So maybe it kind of lives and dies with how good the snow lands in the set are, but in most cases, it's just a 2 mana 2/2 that ramps you. So long as you've got enough snow basics, or snow lands, period, in your mana base, this is almost always going to ramp you and have cool art in the meantime. So I guess it's not terrible, especially in limited. But now, Raven Form is easily the best of these to my mind. This is 3 mana, 2 and a blue for a sorcery. Exile. Target artifact or creature, baby. Its controller creates a 1/1 blue bird creature token when flying. You foretell this for a blue mana after, of course, paying 2 generic mana on an earlier turn and setting it aside face down in exile. I think that this is, again, just the best of all of these. Super easily. Even if this didn't have a foretell cost or anything, it just didn't have foretell whatsoever, I think it would be like a somewhat playable card. I hate the sorcery speed on this, but I think it's probably better than some of the other blue effects that we've seen like this so far, like Pongify is a good example, or Pongify. I've never been sure how to pronounce that card, but still. Exile, an artifact or creature, son, that is really good on the commander table, but it's probably at least decent in Standard. Of course, it does leave behind a creature that's difficult to block, but you're just giving your opponent a 1/1 token. That's In my mind, it's better than Pongify, because Pongify leaves behind something that can kill you. This kills you in 20 turns, but like, who cares, you know? You got plenty of ways to clean up that bird token, and you'd much rather have a 1/1 bird token facing you down than like an Anax. So I think this is actually really, really good, and I play a lot of mono blue in Standard. I play mono blue Control, I play mono blue Mill, and I think this probably goes in both of those decks. Mono blue getting something that can exile a great hinge, leave behind a bird, yeah, I'll take that. Mono blue getting something that can exile, you know, just any big old creature that somehow hit the table through your counterspell. Like, yeah, yes, I will absolutely take this. And I'm not sure that it's destined to see too much Standard play, because it is a little expensive, it is a little bit sorcery speed, and, you know, a little bit, it's all the way sorcery speed. And if you just pair blue with another color, like black or white or whatever, you just get better removal than this by a billion miles. So I'm not sure how playable the card actually is, but I do really, really like it for mono blue and on the commander table again. This is probably going to shine. But some of the uncommons from today included Giant's Amulet, Hailstorm Valkyrie, and Blizzard Fight, which is probably not the name of the card, but it's all we got right now. Giant's Amulet is a 1 blue mana for an equipment, and when it ETBs, you may pay 3 and a blue. If you do, create a 4/4 blue giant wizard creature token, then attach Giant's Amulet to it. Equipped creature gets +0/+1 and this creature has hexproof as long as it's untapped. You can equip this to something else for 2 mana. Now, so for 3 total mana, a blue and then equip 2, you can make a creature +0/+1 and have hexproof. That goes really, really well on vigilant creatures, and I shouldn't have to tell you that. So that's actually not terrible. Hexproof is a good ability to just give something, especially, again, a creature with vigilance in this case would be very, very nice. So this might actually go in, say, blue-white all that glitters decks that have access to, like, Sentinel's Eyes to make the creature vigilant. It's at least possible. I don't think that this goes in Giants decks and Standard, but it is a really, really good limited equipment that for 5 mana generates a 4/5 hexproof, as long as it's untapped at least. So that's actually a pretty good rate in limited, and it's likely to see a fair amount of play there. Now on to Hailstorm Valkyrie. This is 3 and a black for a 2/2 snow creature. It's an angel wizard. It has flying and trample, and if you pay 2 snow, it gets +2/+2 till end of turn. That's actually not terrible in limited. The base stats aren't very good at all, but this could finish a game for you pretty easily, especially if you had enough snow to pump it twice and make it like a 6/6 flying trample. That could finish a game, so I don't want to downplay how good this card could potentially be in limited, but 4 mana is a pretty large startup cost. But again, though, this could just finish the game. But on to Blizzard Fight. This is just 1 green mana for a snow sorcery. Choose target creature you control and target creature you don't control. If you control 3 or more snow permanents, the creature you control gains +1/+0 and indestructible until end of turn. Then the creatures fight. So just to clear this up, even if you don't control 3 snow permanents, the creatures still fight. So it's still a prey upon, even if you don't have 3 snow. But if you do happen to have 3 snow permanents, it's on. The creature gets +1/+0 and indestructible, meaning that it can't possibly die in the fight, which is really sweet. Just throwing that out there for 1 green mana. And it's possible, I would imagine, in some situations, to get this on turn 2. You know, if you play first, you just drop a snow basic, then drop a 1-drop snow creature. Turn 2, drop a snow creature and take out their 1-drop. You could do that, but the best use of this card is probably in the late game when you're almost guaranteed to have 3 snow permanents that are just lands anyway, right? You don't even have to have snow creatures on the board. Past turn 3, 4, or 5, this is just 1 mana removal that you can probably take just about anything out with, depending on how large your creatures are, and obviously green has no shortage of large creatures. So I think this is really, really good in a lot of ways for just 1 mana. Yeah, that kind of looks fantastic, but we do already have really good fight effects in Standard that this has to be better than and more consistent than, and that's probably going to be a higher hurdle to clear than we think it is, but at the same time, 1 green mana for this effect is kind of amazing. We also saw a couple of uncommon sagas today, the Trickster God's Heist and Forging the Tyrite Sword. Now, Sword is 3 mana, 1 and then Boros colors, and on chapters 1 and 2 you get a treasure token, and then chapter 3 you search your library for a card named Halvar, God of Battle, or an equipment card, reveal it, put it in your hand, shuffle your library. So I would imagine most of the time you're actually going to get Embercleave with this. And that would be on turn 5, which is really, really good. It actually even helps you cast the Embercleave if you're kind of low on creatures, which is sweet. But this can go get all kinds of stuff, obviously. You don't have to just go get an Embercleave. In the meantime, I do think that Boros Ramp is kind of... You can celebrate that. I mean, in a way, this is a Boros Cultivate, isn't it? It kind of ramps you by 2. And that's really, really sweet if you're willing to take that turn off. There will be like Boros or Mardu or Jeskai Ugin decks that might want to play this just to get the ramp out of it. And you can include like a one of Halvar or something like that if you want to use the search function. So all in all, I do really, really like this card, but I think that it's slightly awkward, all things considered. But Boros Ramp is always going to be welcome. Trickster God's Heist is a little awkward. This is 2, a blue, and a black. You may exchange control of 2 target creatures in Chapter 1. In Chapter 2, you may exchange control of 2 target non-basic, non-creature permanents that share a card type. And then in Chapter 3, target player loses 3 and you gain 3. This is interesting, I will admit. I'll be the first to admit. I see a lot of people wigging out about this card today, and I'm just not really sure that it impresses me like that. You know, exchanging control of 2 target creatures is probably the coolest chapter, and the good thing is it happens immediately when you play the card. You trade your 1/1 or your 1/2 or whatever for like the best thing on your opponent's side of the table. And that is pretty good no matter when in the game you end up drawing the card. You know, if you draw it on turn 6 and you trade your garbage for their Terror of the Peaks or something, that seems like a really good trade. So Chapter 1 is my favorite thing about the card, but obviously you can body them with Chapter 2, you know, trade 2 Planeswalkers, you get their Ugin. But that'll probably never happen given that they can just exile this with Ugin's ability. So I'm not actually sure about this second chapter. Maybe you get a really good land and they get a basic. You know, maybe you get a really good artifact and they get a crappy one. You have to play crappy artifacts, remember. If you want to give them crappy cards, you have to play crappy cards, which I'm not a huge fan of. But the third chapter here isn't super impressive, but I guess with a couple of them, you know, that's like 6 damage. It could be worse. You know, this could help give you that last little bit that you need to push through to finish the game or something. But Chapter 3, I think, is the least impressive chapter. The other 2 are really cool to think about, though. Now, the other 3 uncommons from today were Bredegard's Stronghold, Path to the World Tree, and Ferja, Judge of Valor, who is just kind of one of those random uncommon legends that you see every now and again. This is 5 mana, 2 a white and 2 black for a 2/4 legendary angel cleric, flying, and lifelink. Whenever you cast your second spell each turn, look at the top 3 cards of your library. Put one of them into your hand and the rest into your graveyard. So I think this is actually really, really cool, although probably not super standard playable. 5 mana for a 2/4 flying lifelink is just not really the stats that I'm looking for, to be honest. I mean, they're not terrible stats. By itself, a 2/4 flying lifelink is at least something, but it's probably not what you're looking for your 5 freaking mana investment. But when you do cast that second spell in a turn, getting card advantage and Orzhov is really, really cool. So even though the initial investment is really high on this card, if it sticks around for even 1 turn and gets you 1 piece of card advantage, that's better than pretty much every other Orzhov card you could be playing right now can do for you in terms of card advantage. So I really kind of like this card, but I'm apprehensive about the actual expense of getting it on the battlefield in the first place. Let me put it that way. The other uncommons, looking really good, though. Bredegard's Stronghold, a land, enters the battlefield tapped and adds green. Or you can pay a green and 2 white, tap it and sack it to put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures you control. They gain vigilance and lifelink until end of turn, but you can only activate this anytime you can cast a sorcery. So obviously green-white green-white counters is already a deck with Conclave, Mentor, and stuff. And it would love having this on turns where it draws dead, because if you do have a Mentor out, then obviously, you know, 2 creatures get 2 +1/+1 counters, gain vigilance and lifelink. That just seems like a really, really good turn. And it's just a land. It sucks you can't do this on the turn that you actually play the land because it comes into play tapped, but you know, still, this is almost never a dead draw. And even when it is a dead draw that turn, it's going to be really relevant on the next turn a lot of the time. Just green-white, I think, needs a couple of small pushes to make it a real deck. And this might be one of those little things that it needs. But aside from that, we also saw Path to the World Tree. This is 1 and a green for an enchantment. When Path to the World Tree enters the battlefield, search your library for a basic land, reveal it, put it into your hand, shuffle your library. You can pay 2 and then 1 of each color to sacrifice Path of the World Tree. You gain 2 life, you draw 2 cards. Target opponent loses 2 life. Path of the World Tree deals 2 damage to up to 1 target creature. You create a 2/2 green bear creature token, so you get to do something with a 2 in it that each color has access to. And I still don't love this. I gotta say, one thing I will say about it is this might be good for Constellation decks and Citizen Champion decks and stuff like that are just looking for a cheap enchantment. It's a 2-drop enchantment that guarantees you get the 3rd land to play your Citizen Champion. So, like, maybe it's okay, and then later on in the game, if you have all the mana, all the 7 mana that you need to do this, then you can kill a thing, pop your opponent for 2, gain 2, draw a couple of cards, which is probably the best part of it, and even affect the board state by creating a 2/2. So maybe this is a little bit better than I think it is if it gives you like an Archon of Sun's Grace trigger when it comes into play, and a basic land to help you get that 5th land for next turn, for an Elspeth Conquers Death or something. Like, there's a few cool lines with this card. It effectively replaces itself with a basic land when you do play it. And then later on, it gets you 2 cards. I don't even care about half the other stuff it does. It gets you 2 cards, and that's pretty good. It can also finish the game if you have enough copies of it in play. So, I don't know. It's not a terrible card, but I'm not sure that it's going to be worth the opportunity cost most of the time. But up next, probably one of the most hyped cards of the day. It's the World Tree, everybody. It's Yggdrasil, and it's just a land. This isn't legendary. How is this not legendary? It enters the battlefield tapped. You can tap it for green. As long as you control 6 or more lands you control have tapped to add 1 mana of any color. And you can door to nothingness. You can that activation cost. 2 white, 2 blue, 2 black, 2 red, 2 green, tap it, sack it. Search your library for any number of god cards, put them on the battlefield, shuffle your library like a mad person. Honestly, I don't really care about the last ability. I think that you could probably do really cool things with it so long as you had 10, 11 really freaking mana on the battlefield, because obviously you have to have this too, and tap it and sack it. So 11 things on the battlefield to actually use the ability, and then maybe you go get like 2 or 3 gods. Maybe that's really, really good, but I don't care as much about that as I do about as long as you control 6 or more lands, Chromatic Lantern. That is really good looking to me. There's going to be commander decks that play this, or I should say almost every commander deck. Well, that's not true. Not every commander deck, but a lot of commander decks that are green and literally even 1 other color. Or 5-color commander decks obviously need to fit 1 copy of this. Every single 5-color commander deck. Even 3 and 4-color commander deck. You want this. But even in standard, I think that you probably want this card too. This makes 4 and 5-color control way more easy to envision. And I know that people hate these decks, but 5-color rainbow control has always been one of my favorite decks. Since like 1996, baby. Undiscovered Paradise, I was there. So, like, it's been a while, but I think 5-color control might actually can work again at some point in the near future. And if it does, this card will probably be instrumental in making that happen. But up next, probably the last rare of the day that I'm not super impressed by, and I apologize for that, is Cosmos Charger. I want to like this thing a lot, though. It's 4 mana, 3 and a blue for a 3/3 Horse Spirit. These are some creature types. With flash and flying. Foretelling cards from your hand cost 1 less and can be done on any player's turn. And you can foretell this for 2 and a blue after, of course, paying 2 mana to put it into exile face down on one of your turns. Now, this... good. It's a good card. I mean, I just said I'm not super impressed by it, but that does not mean I didn't say that it's a bad card. Let me say that. It's not terrible. 4 mana for a 3/3 flash flying is at least okay. I think there have been like limited commons with that stat line with flash and flying, so I'm not super impressed by that, but at least it has flash, and that's the important part of this. This is probably like the big Foretell engine, because one of the worst things about Foretell is that it costs 2 mana on your turn. Not sorcery speed. You can do it during your combat step, but on your turn, you have to pay 2 mana. Which is not ideal. So if you want to, play Foretell cards in your control deck, there's a bit of a schematic issue there. But now you got Cosmos Charger, kid. On like, say, turn 5. If you have 5 mana up, you can play Cosmos Charger at the end of your opponent's turn and immediately foretell a card. And I think that's going to be a really good stat line, or a really good play line a lot of the time. Make sure you go ahead and get this cost reduction. But note the way that it's worded. It doesn't just say, you can pay 1 to foretell cards. No, it costs one less. So that means if you have multiple Cosmos Chargers out, you're just paying the original Foretell cost, that 2 generic mana, for free. It's just becoming, if it's free if you have multiple Cosmos Chargers out. So that's a cool thing to point out about the card too. We just have to see some really, really good Foretell cards in order for this to actually work, because it's probably going to be like the main engine for the deck, but I'm not convinced that we're going to see enough amazing Foretell cards. But that said, this powers up every Foretell card in your deck by a significant amount, so the cards might not have to be that good. But let's get into the real stuff, son. Here's Calamity Bearer, 4 mana, 2 and 2 red for a 3/4 giant berserker. If a giant source you control would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals double that damage to that permanent or player instead. So it's like a little, well, it's not little, it's a giant Torbrand. It's the opposite of a little Torbrand. But only for giants, mister. Now I want to clear some things up about this. First of all, this does not double the damage on Stomp, the adventure half of Bone Crusher Giant. That is not a giant source whatsoever. It's not a giant source. I promise you. It's in DO rules and all that. But anyway, the good news is that this does double the damage if they try to target your Bone Crusher Giant. So if they want to take it out with a Heartless Act, it's going to cost 4 life, which is kind of a lot, in case you didn't know. So that's good, but altogether, I just like this card by itself. It's kind of a 4 mana 6/4, which is a decent rate. Let's not kid ourselves. It wears an Embercleave really, really well, you know. With an Embercleave on it, this has 4 power, which means the first hit does 8, the second hit does 8. This thing basically swings an Embercleave for 16 by itself, even if you don't have other giants out. Plus, like, we've got plenty of playable giants, Bone Crusher being one of them. So Bone Crusher swinging for 8 by itself with no Embercleave on it seems unfreaking believable. It's just like, this is a very good-looking card to me. Because 4 mana is not a bad investment, you know, compared to like Tectonic Giant. And this looks a little bit better in a lot of ways. But you can play it alongside Tectonic Giants. I do like this. I think it's going to be a really important card for the Giants decks, if they in fact exist at all. So let's get to the last rare of the day before we hit the Mythics. But this is better looking to me than some of the Mythics today by a lot. This is Tegrid, Goddess of Dread, a 5 mana, 3 and 2 black, 4/5 legendary god with Menace. Whenever an opponent sacrifices a non-token permanent or discards a permanent card, you can put that card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. But if that weren't enough, you could also cast Tegrid's Lantern instead. This is 4 mana, 3 and a black, tap. Target player loses 3 life unless they sacrifice a non-land permanent or discard a card. And if that weren't enough, you can pay 3 and a black and untap it and use it again. Both halves of this are awesome. Like, honestly, I do have my thoughts, you know, like if you have to critically analyze every card that you see, so I can't just like fangirl out about these cards, because there are definitely some issues, right? 5 mana is a lot for the creature half. 5 mana is an awful lot, and it's probably not going to do a whole lot the turn it enters the battlefield. You might just not be able to make them discard stuff, and when you do make them discard stuff, it's not a permanent, so you really don't get any benefit off of Tegrid in that situation. If you make them sacrifice stuff, however, that's when things get really interesting, but it's probably going to be difficult to make them sacrifice stuff on the turn that you play this, or even the turn after you play it, depending on what you're doing in your deck. And that even goes with Commander. You will not always, for sure, have a way to make your opponent sacrifice things, but that is where stuff gets pretty dangerous, because if you have mass sacrifice or mass discard effects, this thing just becomes one of the best cards in Commander history, right? Like, what is it, Dark Deal, that makes every opponent discard their hand and draw that many cards -1? Yeah, so you just get every permanent that's in every opponent's hand if you have a Tegrid out. I mean, that's stupid, right? Like, that seems like a very dumb play. So I'm excited to do garbage like that in Commander, but we'll see how good the card actually is in Standard. As far as the Lantern half of it, well, it goes really well, obviously, if you already have a Tegrid out. It kind of mitigates the legend rule, because you can just play the Lantern part of it and start getting cards from your opponent, because if you make them sacrifice or discard stuff with the Lantern, obviously Tegrid will bring that stuff onto the battlefield under your control. A potentially ridiculous ability, right? Like, there's a lot of variance on this. I'll say that much. But there's going to be points where you catch your opponent in a situation where they have to sacrifice something they would otherwise not want to. Not with the Lantern. Note they can just take 3 damage. If they don't want to sacrifice, like, their Ugin and give it to you, basically. They don't have to. They can just they can pay 3 life. But obviously your opponent can't do that over and over. And if you have enough mana, untapping the Lantern is pretty sweet. Like, even on like turn 4, play the Lantern, activate it. And then turn 5, tap the Lantern, untap it, tap it again, like 3 activations within the a couple of turns. Sounds very serious. That could be worth up to 9 life from your opponent, or it could actually make him sacrifice things. But that's just it. It costs 4 mana to cast the Lantern half, and it doesn't actually affect the board state when you tap it. So maybe you pay 4 mana, you tap it, they pay 3 life, and then they just go and run over you with a board full of creatures. So I really wish that this card affected the board state. Again, let's critically analyze these. And it doesn't. This doesn't. Even when you like tap it, untap it, tap it again, you haven't really affected the board state if you don't have a Tegrid out as well. So I'm just not sure. Honestly, I think that this effect is probably really, really annoying and can actually win the game by itself, the Lantern. But it's few and far between that's actually going to happen. And the artifact is legendary too. So I'm just not... Here's the thing. I think I like this more than I should. I've been saying I don't like this card as much as I want to. I don't like this card as much as I probably should. This is one of those cards I think I like a little bit more than I actually should. Once you look at it, and you discover the holes in it, and you think, oh, this doesn't affect the table. Oh, you have to wait a turn to actually do anything with the Tegrid half of it most of the time, and it's not even guaranteed you get to do anything with it. So it might just be a 4/5 for 5, which isn't a very good ability or a very good stat line, even when you throw the menace on it. The Lantern might literally do nothing over the course of 2 or 3 whole turns. It might just zap your opponent for a few, but they don't care because they're just killing you. There's definitely like issues with this card. But all things considered, it's just a really, really cool card. And I imagine the Lantern half of it especially is really annoying to have to play against. But let's talk Mythics, y'all. Starting with Coma, Cosmos Serpent. This is 7 mana, 3/2 green and 2 blue for a 6/6 legendary serpent that can't be countered. So it's the World Serpent. That's a pretty cool flavor call for you. At the beginning of each upkeep, create a 3/3 blue serpent creature token named Coma's Coil. Sacrifice another serpent to choose one. Tap a permanent. Its activated abilities can't be activated this turn. And Coma Cosmos Serpent gains indestructible until end of turn. So you can tap a Planeswalker during their upkeep by sacking a serpent, and they can't use the Planeswalker during their turn. That might actually be really good against Ugins and such. Plus, this costs 7 mana. So if your opponent plays an Ugin, they have to, obliterate their own Ugin to actually take this out. And it can't be countered. That's good, but it costs 7 mana. That's my only issue with the card, is that 7 mana is an awful lot. And we've already got a bunch of big, stupid 7 and 8 mana spells we're trying to get to in Standard right now, like the aforementioned Ugin, Genesis Ultimatum and stuff. So I'm just not 100% sure this even sees much play, especially in the main deck. Maybe it's sideboardable if control becomes important, or maybe even against rogues, although 7 mana against rogues is something you're not always going to get to. If this does hit the table, then your opponent has a little bit of time to actually do something about it before you can make a serpent and make it indestructible. They can kill it on your turn, or they can respond to the trigger where you make a serpent by killing with a Heartless Act, and then they took out your 7 mana thing with a 2 mana play. You don't feel too good about that. So I'm not super sure this card is good, but if it sticks around for more than 1 turn, it's absolutely phenomenal. It's unbelievably good. If it sits on the battlefield for more than a turn, it probably just ends the game by itself a lot of the time. But altogether, I'm just not sure that this is where you want to be in a lot of Standard decks. But again, willing to be wrong on this one because it just seems so cool. Making a serpent every upkeep, not every your upkeep, every single upkeep, is a pretty boss thing to be able to do, and not being able to be countered is sweet. And again, I specifically like the way it plays against a fresh Ugin. They want to kill it, they got to sacrifice their own Ugin effectively. So a lot of cool little wrinkles about this card, but in the end, I'm just not sure it quite makes it. So let's look at Goldspan Dragon next. This is 5 mana, 3 and 2 red for a 4/4 dragon with flying and haste. And whenever it attacks or becomes the target of a spell, you create a treasure token. Treasures you control have tap, sack this artifact, add 2 mana of any color. So this is unbelievable. This is a really good card. 5 mana for a 4/4 flying haste is really good stats, mostly because of the haste, to be honest. The haste makes me like this card an awful lot because it goes ahead, so long as it makes it to the combat step, it goes ahead and makes a treasure token. And during your combat step, by the way, you can pop that treasure token for 2 mana, so that makes it a lot easier to get, an Embercleave on something. And by the way, this wears an Embercleave very well, 10 flying, could be haste damage depending on how many other creatures you're swinging with at the time. If you play this and swing with 3 other creatures that turn besides this, then the treasure token this creates allows you to cast an Embercleave on that turn, which is insanity. So I just like a lot about this, even if it doesn't do a whole heck of a lot for you. It doesn't cast the Embercleave or whatever. It's still generating a ton of ramp for you. These big red decks might really like something like this. Decks that are trying to get to their 5 drops, but also trying to get to Ugin and stuff. This is a really good stop along the way on the curb. And I think it does a lot more than a card like, say, Terror of the Peaks does, because it does so much on the turn it enters the battlefield. Even if you lose it during the first combat step that it can take place in, you still get a treasure token that, doesn't pop for 2 anymore because this thing's gone, but it's still left behind some value, which is better than nothing. So you'd be surprised how many times Big Red, has an Ugin in its hand in 7 mana. So just before it loses the game. So even just this one treasure token that it might leave behind is a huge deal sometimes. So I really like this. If you can't tell, this is the first card of the day that I really like, and I'm convinced we'll actually see some amount of standard play, even at the casting cost. Because this is one of the few cards we've seen in this entire set that costs so much to cast, yes, but actually does something the turn at ETBs. Not guaranteed, but at least it attacks and creates a treasure token if it survives to the combat step. And that's a lot more action on the turn you play it than most of the cards we've seen in the set so far. So I'm pretty jacked for this. It does remind me a little bit of Glorybringer, I'm not going to lie, but it's no Glorybringer. You are not Glorybringer, but I'll take Glorybringer that ramps instead of killing creatures every day of the week. But let's check out Esika, God of the Tree, or Esika, probably. Really cool art, by the way. Love this color palette. But it's 3 mana, 1 and 2 green for a 1/4 legendary god with Vigilance. You can tap it to add 1 mana of any color. Other legendary creatures you control have Vigilance and tap, add 1 mana of any color. And you can also, rather than cast Esika, if you don't want to, you can cast the other half of her, which is the Prismatic Bridge. And that is gorgeous art right there. It's 1 of each color for a legendary enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature or planeswalker card. Put that card onto the battlefield and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. I'm not super impressed by it. I'm not even super impressed by, the other bit of text on this. If you happen to have other legendary creatures they also tap for mana, that might end up being one of the most important parts of the card, because obviously if you have this card out and another legend or 2, it helps you cast the other half of it when you draw it again later. So, I don't know. I think the card is cool. It kind of has synergy with itself in some interesting ways, as all of these gods do so far. And obviously the art is balling on both halves of it, but this is one of those I have to be convinced by before I think it's truly a very good Magic card. However, let me just put it this way, even if you never ever cast the creature half of it in any game, the Prismatic Bridge is good enough that this is probably a bomb Magic card. Guaranteed to get you a permanent every single turn of the game, and usually a pretty good one at that. So I do like this card a lot. I don't mean for it to sound like I'm pooping on the card, because the Prismatic Bridge half of it is absolutely extremely powerful, but you do have to wait a turn to use it after you cast it. It gives your opponent some time to do something about it, but it's an enchantment, so it's kind of tough to do something about. The worst thing that could happen is that you pay 5 mana for an enchantment that doesn't actually do anything, and your opponent just goes and runs your face over, just bulldozes you, which will happen in some games, but at the same time, this is probably powerful enough, especially in the game of Commander. I can't even imagine, but in Standard, this is probably powerful enough that at least a few jank lords like me are going to try to make decks around it. Guaranteed you will see a deck based around this card, I promise. But final card of the day, here's Tyvar Kell. Kel Mitchell is back. It's 4 mana, 2 and 2 green for a legendary planeswalker named Tyvar with 3 loyalty. Elves you control have tap to add a black mana. Okay. You can +1 Tyvar to put a +1/+1 counter on up to one target elf. Untap it. It gains Death Touch till end of turn. You can also 0 Tyvar to create a 1/1 green elf warrior creature token that, of course, remember, taps for a black mana. And you can -6 Tyvar to get an emblem with whenever you cast an elf spell, it gains haste until end of turn and you draw 2 cards. That ultimate is just silly. That's a really, really good ultimate. Play an elf, draw 2, probably drawing you into another elf, which will allow you to draw 2 more, which will draw you into 2 more elves, and they'll draw you 4 cards. It's just, ultimate is silly, but of course you have to sit around putting +1/+1 counters on elves until you actually get to it, which could be freaking forever. So let me just say, it gains Death Touch until end of turn. Okay, if it put like a Death Touch counter on it, that'd be another thing, but gaining Death Touch until end of turn almost does nothing. So I'm not too convinced I love that. My favorite thing about this is that, first of all, it makes all your elves ramp, if they didn't already do that. But it not only makes all your elves ramp, it makes them produce a pretty relevant color, because just tapping for green is kind of boring. Tapping for black, really cool. Making all your elves of Deep Shadow, yeah, it's pretty dope. So I'll take that. But maybe my favorite thing about this is just zeroing it for an elf token every single turn. That's not bad. For an initial 4 mana investment, it could definitely be better because you don't want to pay 4 mana for a Planeswalker that's kind of stuck on 3 loyalty the turn that you play it. But at the same time, at least you're creating a creature that can block and help, defend it until you wait to get to your next turn to use it again. So I don't know. It's not like incredibly impressive, to be honest, but I do love the 0 ability. Sometimes this is a minus, obviously. So I love the 0 ability. And even the +1, as long as you eventually get to the ultimate, is crazy because the ultimate is so good. I'm telling you, if you make it to the ultimate on this, you have won the game 9 times out of 10. But, all things considered, I think it's a solid Planeswalker that'll probably see some amount of play, and at the very least probably has to be a one of in every Commander Elves deck, unless you just really are that adverse to playing Planeswalkers. But I imagine Elves players are rejoicing right now because you finally get like a really good Planeswalker. So at least there's that. If you really wanted a Planeswalker in Elves that specifically works with Elves, you've got it. It's yours now, kid. But I don't know. I wish I could be more excited about this too, but I'll take a Creature Factory every day. And that's all the cards from today so far, at least. Now, what was good from today? I like Tegrid today, the Tegrid and her Lantern. Although I did say it might be worse than I think it is. I did like the Prismatic Bridge today. Maybe it sounded like I was crapping on it slightly, but I did love that card. The 2 mana Rock is a card that exists. Forging the Tyride Sword is dope because it's Boros Ramp. I like Boros Ramp. I think the Dragon is really good. Calamity Bearer is good. Good red creatures today. So let me know how you felt about all of today's spoilers, what you think was powerful, how you, if you agreed or disagreed with my takes, and why. I had a long-time viewer reply to me yesterday or comment on the video and say, like, wow, for the first time, I think I disagreed with most of your takes. But I'd like to know why you disagree with my takes, because it's obvious I could be missing something huge here. Just let me know down there in the comment section how you felt about all these cards and my takes on them and all that. Give me your takes. I'm interested. I read your comments, obviously. The last 2 videos I've pointed out comments people have made. So I read your comments. Get down there. I will see them. But aside from that, if you enjoyed the video, make sure you like it, subscribe, hit the bell for the notifications, making that 120K subs push during spoiler season. We can make it, y'all. You just got to help me. Sorry for shaking the camera. That's just how powerful I am. In any case, if you want to help me out on that end, sub, hit the bell for the notifications. And if you really want to help out around here, then you can check me out on Patreon, patreon.com/SBMTG, or hit the link in the description. $1 a month is all I ask, and with that $1 a month, you can vote on what decks and videos we do first in Kaldheim Standard, and in fact, all through Kaldheim Standard. So $1 a month isn't really too much to get on that train and affect the very course of YouTube history itself. Help me out with that. And if you want to watch me play Magic and talk about these spoilers on Twitch, go over to twitch.tv/SBMTGDev, or again, hit the link in the description. Following is free over there. So do all that stuff, and I got to get to editing this video so it gets out before midnight. I love you all, and I will catch you cats later. I'm Dev from The Place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind.